great to be with you at Business Transforum. I was here 2 years ago. Was anybody else here? I just want to say, it's really kind of you to invite me back. Obviously, I didn't do a very good job first time, so thank you for the second chance. I'm really grateful. I'm very grateful to my friend Wilfried, who first got me involved in this exciting network of Christians in business. I wanted to start, and some of you will have heard this little bit before, but I wanted to start by explaining a little bit about relationology. Because people say to me, Matt, where did that word come from? I've not heard it before. Well, I made it up. A few years ago, I was invited to speak at a business conference. And it's always exciting when you get that invitation that comes through the post or into your email box and says, we'd like to invite you to come and speak to our conference. And it's great that people want you to come and share your ideas and share your experience. And so I read it with delight, and I could do the date. And then I read down a little bit further, and my heart sank. Because the subject they wanted me to speak about wasn't just a subject that I disliked, but it was actually a subject I hate. And so I remember talking to the organizer of the conference and thanking them for the kind invitation, but explaining I couldn't possibly accept because what they'd asked me to speak about, I really, really hated. And the subject they'd asked me to speak about was networking. I don't know what happens to you when you hear the word networking. I cringe and squirm and with disgust. And I explained to the conference organizer that I find networking contrived and manipulative and disingenuous. Have you ever been at one of those conferences and you're stood talking to somebody? And as you're talking to them, you think, oh, this is lovely. They're really interested in me. They're asking me so many great questions. And then it dawns on you. They're actually not interested in you. They're interested in what you could do for them. And they'll ask you questions for as long as they think you can be useful. But as soon as they think you can't, they'll be off like a shot. Ever happened to you? You've ever been at a gathering and you're stood talking to somebody. And yes, we all get distracted, but you're stood with a person and they keep on looking over your shoulder, thinking that maybe somebody more important has walked into the room and they should go and talk to them instead. Ever happened to you? These are some of the reasons why I hate networking. Well, by the time I'd finished explaining to the conference organizer why I hated networking, they were a little bit flat. And so I said, but I do believe in the power of relationships. I believe that relationships grow people, relationships grow teams, and relationships grow business. By the time I'd finished, he said, will you come and speak to us on that subject? So I agreed. I didn't want to become known as the anti-networking guy. As Christians, we need to sometimes remember, it's not a good thing to be defined by what we're against. So I thought, what can I call this? And I thought, well, relationships are a science. Because every single one of us can learn to do relationships better. Relationships are an art form. Because mastering relationships takes a lifetime of practice and learning. And so I was thinking about the art and the science and the study of relationships, and God gave me a word, relationology. I ran to my computer, I Googled it. I couldn't find it. I formed the company. I trademarked the name. I bought the web domain. And that's where my business began. And now I find myself working with financial institutions, banks, professional services firms, internationally, helping them grow their people, grow their teams, and grow their business by building powerful relationships. And for me, you see, as a Christian businessman, it's not that I stand up and preach or I'm constantly on edge, waiting for an opportunity to tell somebody about the gospel. No, because at the very heart of my business is, I believe, the heart of God and the heart of the gospel. Because God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit exists in this amazing relationship where the Father loves the Son and the Son loves the Father, and they send the Holy Spirit into the world. And it exists in this incredible family. I mean, some people say it doesn't make sense, but do you know what? When I went to school, 1 plus 1 plus 1 was 3. But 1 multiplied by 1 multiplied by 1 is 1. The Trinity actually is completely logical. That God is one, but He is 3 persons. And we're created in the image of a God who is relationship. We're created to be like Him. So we can only flourish and thrive in relationship with other people. And I can walk into any bank in the world and say the true currency of banking is relationships, not money. And I can say that with total and utter conviction, and that I can help you grow your revenue or your funds under management or whatever metrics you set, because it's God's design. God has designed us for relationship. The gospel is about reconciliation of relationship, a reconciliation of relationship with Him and with one another. So relationships, whether you confess Christ or not, whether you go to church or not, you can only flourish and thrive in relationship with other people. It doesn't matter what your belief system is, because God has made you that way. We're made for relationship. And what I want to talk about today, and I've got a workshop later on, but in this session, what I want to talk about is this, that high trust relationships build high performance leaders, teams, and organizations. High trust relationships build high performance leaders, teams, and organizations. So if you want your team to perform better, if you want to be more effective as a leader, if you want your business, your organization to flourish and thrive, the key is building high trust relationships. As well as running a business, I run an NGO, a not-for-profit, called Cinnamon Network. And we help churches transform communities. And we found this approach where we would look for the best church-based community projects, serving the poor, people who are hungry, people out of work, people in debt, young people at risk of exclusion from school, ex-offenders, refugees, serving a wide variety of social needs. And we thought, what if we took these projects and we did what McDonald's has done? Well, not quite. But what if we franchised them? What if we took the best practice that had been pioneered in one community by one church and actually help another church start it? So we created this vision, Cinnamon Network. And in the UK now, there are 33 best practice community projects that have been replicated now by 3,500 churches. So that churches don't have to reinvent the wheel to impact their communities. They can actually take a project that's tried and tested by another church and take their learning and adapt it in their context. Anyway, when I got started, I remember we registered the charity. This is a banking story. The point's coming. We registered the charity. That was the relatively easy bit. Then I needed to get some funding, and I figured in the first year I needed to raise £240,000. You can work that out in euros or dollars. And I went to a friend and I said, could you help? He said, yes. He said, I'll give you £40,000 a year if you get 5 other people to give you £40,000 a year as well. I left the meeting, I wasn't sure if I was encouraged or not. But within 2 months, I'd found 5 other people who would give £40,000 a year to underwrite the beginning of this ministry. And so I had the promise, the pledge of £250,000. Now the next challenge was opening a bank account. I remember filling in the forms. I remember getting all the signatories from all the trustees. I remember going through all the process and then sending it off to a special charity office within the bank. I chased them for what seemed like months, but the weeks went on and on and on. And they didn't give me a bank account. And I had £250,000 waiting to pay in. Can you imagine the frustration? And it was just going through process, going through the system. I knew somebody who worked at this particular bank. And I phoned them and expressed my frustration. I said, I actually want to give you money. Just give me a bank account. They said, leave it with me. I said, this was in December. I said, all I want for Christmas is a bank account. And it was just before Christmas, 2 days before Christmas. And my friend went and talked to somebody, and we got the letter confirming our bank account number. Now, I tell that story because relationships expedite due process. Relationships get things done. Relationships don't bypass due process. That's corruption. But relationships of trust can speed things up and make things happen. And that's exactly what happened in this situation. We'd followed all the due process. But somewhere in the system, it wasn't quite working. I remember going to see a client at one of the big 4 professional services firms. And I do a lot of work for them. Relationology is an approved provider. And they sat down and they told me about a problem. And it was this, that often as a firm, they would bring in what they call direct entry partners. So most people within the firm started at a junior level, get their qualifications, become an accountant, do all that, and then they work their way up to become a partner in the firm, an equity partner. So they don't just get paid, but they get a nice bonus, and they have more responsibility and all of that. So sometimes, instead of allowing people to grow or be promoted to the level of partnership within the firm, they'd bring senior people from industry, from outside the firm, into the firm. And this was really powerful because they brought with them industry experience, industry expertise. They brought with them industry relationships in the marketplace. They'd pay them a substantial salary and a substantial golden handshake. And as they relayed this story to me, they said, but the problem is, too many of the partners that we bring into the business in this way crash and burn after 9 to 12 months. And it's not that they're not clever people. It's not they haven't got great experience. It's not they don't know people in the marketplace. The reason they crash and burn is this, that once they step into the business, despite the fact that the business has processes and systems for everything, the fact that they don't know anyone in the business means they can't get anything done. They can't put teams together. They don't know the right person to call in that division or that department. And they just find themselves in a place where they are unable to get things done. And so we were looking together at how we could help them fast track the development of their internal relationships in the business, recognizing it's those relationships that drive performance. You see, I'm convinced more than ever that the fastest, simplest and easiest way to get anything done is through trusting relationships. Knowing the person to telephone, knowing the person to have a coffee with, knowing the person whose desk you can walk over to and have a conversation means that you can get things done. And without those relationships, your effectiveness, your performance as a leader is subdued. It's oppressed. So high trust relationships drive high performance leaders, drive high performance teams, drive high performance organizations. And this afternoon I want to ask 3 questions. I wonder if somebody could get me a water, just a still water. Oh, thank you. 3 questions I want to ask is, the first question is this: who should we build relationships with? It sounds a basic question, but it offers a profound challenge to each of us. Who should we build relationships with? Because it's natural and instinctive for us to build relationships with people like us. It's easiest to build a relationship with somebody who speaks the same language. Thank you, Catherine, for translating today. I'd be stuck without you. When we come to build relationships, we tend to build relationships with people we find it easier to relate to. People we have something in common with. Somebody who is like us in some way. Because, oh, thank you so much. Like attracts like, doesn't it? We tend to build relationships with other people that are a little bit like us, or a lot like us. But actually, there is power in building what I call unlikely relationships. The power of building relationships with people who aren't like me, who aren't like you. You see, because likely relationships, they tend to be homogeneous, whereas unlikely relationships tend to be heterogeneous. There's a professor called Mark Granovetter at Stanford University in the US, and he wrote a very famous academic paper called The Strength of Weak Ties. Strong ties, he talked about as strong bonding relationships, and weak ties as more acquaintance-style relationships. And he observed this, as I said, that the bonding relationships tended to be homogeneous with people like us. But the weak ties tended to be heterogeneous with people unlike us. But he pointed out the strength of those weak ties. Because those weak ties, those acquaintance-based relationships with people unlike us, they actually enrich our lives in a very powerful way. You see, if we only build relationships with people like us, we only have access to the ideas, the opportunities and resources that people like us have. But if we can learn to build relationships with people unlike us, we have access to the ideas, the opportunities and resources that people unlike us have. And yet our human instinct is just to build relationships with people like us, where the relationship is easy, rather than people who are unlike us. So at its best, this human instinct we have, at its best, it limits the opportunities, the ideas and resources that we have access to in life. At its best. At its worst, it is the foundations of bias and prejudice. I remember a few years ago going to an event and meeting a gentleman. I was out for dinner with him last night. We became great friends. I'm a quintessential Englishman. He is a quintessential Afro-Caribbean guy, larger than life. But we met, and he had a lovely tie and pocket square on, and I was wearing one of my favorites. And I said, instead of going for lunch, I said, why don't we go tie shopping? So the first time we went out, we went tie shopping. He bought himself what he now calls the Matt Bird set of tie and pocket square. And we realized that we were from completely different worlds, not just racially. We had completely different experiences of life. And so we made a promise to each other that we would introduce each other to each other's worlds. I used to take him to events, and he'd come out afterwards and he'd say, Matt, that was a fantastic time. I had a great time tonight. He said, but it was an absolute whitewash. I was the only black face in the room. I would take him, and he would take me to events. He'd take me places I never knew existed. And I'd have a great time, and I'd come out after and say, Wayne, that was met some great people, great experience. I said, but it was an absolute blackout. I was the only white face in the room. And it's transformed our worlds. One day we're going to write a book together called Salt and Pepper. The journey of two friends and how they introduced each other to each other's worlds. You see, diversity is so powerful. Who we choose to build relationships with. Let's break out of just building relationships with people like us. It's easy in an organization. It's easy in a business, in a church, in a ministry, to avoid the people that you find a bit difficult. But actually leaning into those relationships can be some of the most powerful relationships you can build. Making the effort to cross a barrier, to cross a bridge, to cross a boundary. It may make you feel uncomfortable, but cross those boundaries. Cross those boundaries. McKinsey wrote a paper called Diversity Matters. And in it they said, businesses that embrace gender diversity outperform other businesses by 15%. They said businesses that embrace racial diversity outperform their counterparts by 35%. Building relationships with people unlike us drives performance. Drives the performance of our teams and our business. So the first question is, who do we build relationships with? And I hope that gives you some thoughts to go away with. The second question I want to ask is, why build relationships? In other words, what's your motive? What's your purpose in building relationships? Now, it might be performance, but let me put it this way. Some people only build relationships out of what I call self-interest. They are the networker. They're only into relationships for what they can get. They go to networking events and they scan the room and try and find somebody who can do something for them. And they give out business cards like confetti. They're in it purely for self-interest. But the other motive isn't self-interest. It's what I call genuine interest. To actually build relationships with other people because you are genuinely interested in them as a person. You know, how many people here get a phone call from somebody who doesn't want something from them? How often does that happen? How does it make you feel? You get a phone call. They've not spoken to you for a year, and you get a phone call. There's chit-chat, and then all of a sudden, oh, and can you? Just makes you feel, oh, you only ever phone me when you want something. You're not genuinely interested in me as a person. It's all about what you can get. Genuine interest is different. Genuine interest is a motive. Yes, of course you want to do business. You want to grow what you're doing. But actually, everybody you interact with, you have a genuine interest in them. You see, great relationship builders don't talk to you about themselves. Great relationship builders talk to you about you. They have a genuine interest in you. And so, the most powerful way to build relationships is actually to do it because you're genuinely interested in some other people. It's not for what you can get, but you give in relationships to grow relationships, not to get from relationships. Because every relationship you build has the potential to transform you and transform your business. So the question is, why build relationships? Build relationships out of genuine interest in others. And the third question, how do you build relationships? Well, I've written books on it, and if you didn't get one last year, I've brought some with me, and you can get them this year. But you see, relationships are too important to leave to chance. Let me ask a question. How many of you have a relationship strategy? 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's good. 4, 5, great. So for the rest of you, I'd encourage you to have a relationship strategy, a relationship system. And if you haven't got one, let me give you mine. And if you can make it better, it's yours. If you can make it better, let me know, because I'm always open to learn. But it's simply this. I focus on collecting, keeping, and growing relationships. Collecting people, keeping people, growing people. Collecting, if you're an introvert, you will find walking into a room of people you don't know an exhausting thought. But I want to encourage you. The people who collect relationships the best aren't the people who talk to absolutely everybody. They're the people that have meaningful conversation with just one or two. And instead of going to an event like this and thinking, I've got to build 100 relationships, just set yourself the target of one. You might talk to lots of people over this 24 hours, but if you just meet one person that you have a meaningful connection with, it will have made this event worthwhile for you if you not only collect that person, but you also keep that relationship alive. Because 95% of people are reactive with relationships, not proactive. So if you give out 100 business cards, 95 of the people you gave those business cards to, you will never hear from again. I promise you. You'll never hear from them again. Because only 5% are proactive. So you can transform your impact today by deciding to be part of the 5%. Instead of, months later, finding those business cards in your pocket and think, it's too late now. Follow through with the people you meet. And you don't have to do all of them, just do the one. And if every event, every conference you go to, you add one more person to your ecosystem, it will become rich. And it will enrich you, and you will enrich them. And grow those relationships over a lifetime. Collect those relationships, keep those relationships alive, but seek to grow relationships. Invest in them. Ask the deep questions as well as the casual questions. The recruitment market tells us that 2/3 of jobs are never advertised. Why is that? 2/3 of jobs are never advertised because they go to people already known by the employer. So when you come to look for a job, which job market are you fishing in? Are you fishing in the relational job market, or are you fishing in the 1/3 of jobs that are left when all the best ones have gone? because the risks of employing somebody you don't know are so high. So actually you de-risk recruiting people and appointing people by recruiting and appointing people that have done some work with you before, perhaps as a freelancer or a supplier or somebody you worked with in another business that you know is good, because CVs can lie, interviews can lie, but only your real experience of other people. So but it's not just jobs, it's non-executive positions, it's contracts. 2/3 of them go to people already known by the board chairman, by the client. It's all about relationships. So as I wrap up, I want to just leave you with those 3 questions. If you want to build high trust relationships in order to become a high performance leader, or to grow a high performance team, or to develop a high performance business, ask yourself those 3 questions. Who am I building relationships with? Am I only building relationships with the people like me who I find easy? Because if you are, you're limiting the potential that God has for you. And you could possibly be even prejudiced in the process. Secondly, ask yourself why. Am I only building relationships out of self-interest? Or am I building them out of genuine interest for other people? And thirdly, ask yourself the question, how do I build trusting relationships? What's my strategy? What's my system? Does collect, keep, grow work for me? Take it. If you think it worked for you, it's yours. It's my gift to you today. But remember this, it's high trust relationships that grow high performance business. Thank you very much. Just as I hand back to Oliver, just wanted to highlight 3 books I brought with me. One is Relationology, 101 Secrets to Grow Your Business Through the Power of Relationships. It's got over 100 5-star reviews on Amazon, and only one of them's from my mum. That's a business book. I wrote a book called The Relationship Book, because I believe the Bible is not a book about religion, it's a book about relationships. So I picked 28 biblical characters and drew out a relationship principle from each of their lives. It's a great thing if you want to do something for a month and read one a day. And then my latest book, Transformation, about community and city transformation and what I see God doing around the world to bring churches together in cities and towns and villages, to bring his holistic political, social, economic, spiritual transformation to that place. I'm happy to sign them afterwards, but it does devalue their resale value. Thank you.